Hello and welcome to the Helix and Gene podcast, episode number 26. Today we have a special guest for you, Mohammed Iqbal, the founder and CEO of SweatWorks. SweatWorks' mission is to make health and fitness more accessible to people, and they have consulted with companies such as Nike, Schwinn, Beachbody, Strava, and more. And while we do dive into data and contextualization and where the fitness industry is going, we also dive deeply into Mohammed's personal journey with food and fitness. This was a fascinating interview. If you listen closely, it is littered with gems. So without further ado, we bring you Helix and Gene podcast episode number 26, Mohammed Iqbal.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Helix and Gene Medical Wellness Podcast. Today is episode 26. I have an old friend here, Mohammed Iqbal, who is a new and trending word inside the fitness tech world. And his company, SweatWorks, is really starting to be one of the new innovators within the fitness and wellness world. And I'm very, very excited to have him here. Welcome, Mohammed.
Sam, so good to reconnect. It's been way too long, so let's make sure we don't let that much time pass by. But I'm excited to be on the podcast.
I agree. I love running into people that you meet a long time ago and then you kind of like sort of lose touch with, and then you end up, in a very similar world and you realize how it all comes back together. It's a surreal and a very cool thing. So Mohammed, for our listeners, why don't you start by just, giving us a little background about, who you are, a little bit about how you got to be the CEO and founder of SweatWorks. What is this journey? Give us a little feedback so our listeners can get that.
Yeah, so I'm a first-generation immigrant. I came from the Middle East. Sam, we've got some roots there.
Yep,
My
that's
parents
right.
came here in 1991, moved to New Jersey, and kind of got immersed. I was 11, so kind of got immersed in the American way, which meant also having access to everything and too much of everything.
Right.
And that includes, too much TV, too much Coca-Cola, too much Cocoa Pebbles, right? Those were my favorite things. And, I came from this life, as being in the Middle East, where we, ate in a communal way. We ate together.
Yeah.
I remember eating with our hands, right? So, it sounds silly, but you can only put so much food in your hands, right? It's effort, it's work, and you have to chew, right? And it takes
And there's
time.
a spiritual connection.
There's a spiritual connection there. And that kind of gets lost over here, but also it gives you time to go from hand to mouth, literally, and you understand the connection with the food and you take your time, and it's not this rushed, effort like we are today, like I'm sure we all are.
That's right.
So I just got consumed in that. And also I remember just walking a lot. I remember walking to school. I didn't take the bus. I remember, playing out in the park with my mom, dad, and my sister. Going to the hotel on the weekends, swimming. So we just moved. We were just active, and you didn't think about wellness, right? Like for me, dessert was dates, right? That was dessert.
Right. That's right.
And it was delicious. I still love dates.
Yeah.
And then you come here, and I got introduced like Ben and Jerry's and Baskin Robbins and Cinnabon and all those things. Literally, this is when I remember coming to JFK, and the first thing I had in America was a Cinnabon. I was starving, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a whole bunch of goodness wrapped up in a plastic package. I love it.
Yeah.
Welcome to America.
Right.
And, but I think in what the country affords you is opportunity and access, and it's up to you in terms of what you do with it.
That's right.
So you could live the healthiest life in the world here, and you can also live the most unhealthiest life in the world here. So you can do both, and the choice is up to you. So I ended up gaining weight a lot. I was a fat kid, not even sure, but I was a fat kid. Got into high school and did the President's Challenge when they still had them back in the 90s. And I remember vividly to this day, like running the mile as a freshman. And I was the slowest in my class of like 600. I went to Bergenfield High School, and between guys and girls, by the way, the big class. And I was like, that struck me. I'm like, this doesn't feel right. Because, I'm not super competitive, but I definitely wanted to take care of myself, and I valued the body that I have, and I wanted to be able to do things like play basketball, go for a jog, whatever. I couldn't do those things. So I picked up a book. So I decided to commit, and I'm going to be different. I picked up a book called Optimum Sports Nutrition, came out in '93, and really took that to heart. And that really got me into understanding macro and micro nutrients. So I understood the concept of what does it mean to be macro, like protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and so on. And what does micro mean? And what impact does it have on your body? So I made the connection between what I eat and the purpose that it served to me. And that was an epiphany. Like that really struck it. And I saw immediate change. And I started making changes to my diet. And then I got into fitness. And it's funny, at the time, there were programs like EAS, if you remember, Bill.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Absolutely.
So I got some of my basic fundamental understanding from there, but I also joined the track club. Long story short, by senior year, I ran a mile in 4:32, which is the fastest time in the school.
Wow.
So I went from being the slowest in my class to being the fastest in my school in the mile. And what that taught me is that the gap, and of course there's will and there's talent and other things that come through, but what was the gap between me as a freshman and me as a senior? It was knowledge, and it was access to knowledge. And then I went to college, and everyone says you're going to gain the freshman 15 with the meal plan, and you're going to eat bad food and get drinking and all of that. And none of that happened. In fact, I got in better shape. And then I started working at Sharp and working like really long hours and traveling a lot. And again, people say, oh, you're traveling and you're getting home, you'll get out of shape. Well, that didn't happen, because even though I ate out a lot, I made healthy choices. Anywhere I went, any restaurant I went to, even though I drank, I made healthy choices. There is such a thing as not drinking margaritas and pina coladas when you go out, right? You could and have a good time and still be mindful about what you're putting in your body.
Absolutely.
So I spent 10 years at Sharp, and I then decided, look, I wasn't happy in the marriage that I was in. I wanted change. I just had a kid, and I wanted to be something more special for him. His name's Zachary, and I wanted to be someone that he could be proud of. And that meant doing something with a purpose and doing something that was meaningful, that I was passionate about. So I got divorced, and then I said, well, I had some money saved up. I really believed in this idea of bringing in data to help engagement in fitness. One part that I missed, I did do my MBA at Columbia, and my thesis in that was really around bringing data into fitness. That's how I had this hypothesis, but then I kind of was able to work through that.
That's where the research study came in.
That's where the research came in, and that's where I kind of proved and validated the concept. That's important. So I said, you know what, there's something here, right? So let me go ahead and get started. And in 2012, I started SweatWorks as a digital agency that was purely focused on fitness, and I committed to using data and research to drive decisions that we make. So our purpose is, our mission is wellness for all. I should say that is our vision. But really what we are about is working with brands, either a startup or established brands, to help them recruit customers that we know they can relate to, and then keep them there by showing them change, helping them with their journey, and really being engaged with the whole process of living a wellness-based life.
So, that's a lot of good information. First things first, yes, I love that you and I share, we are both first generation immigrants from the Middle East. So I totally, you're from Dubai, I'm from Iran. I moved here when I was 9 in '89. So, it's a very similar story. And I think a lot of guys in our world have a very similar story to that, and I love how you've taken advantage of the open market and the freedom of being in this amazing country we live in today, and really being able to, utilize all the resources that other places around the world couldn't possibly imagine having, right?
That's so true. And people always ask, could you have done this in Dubai? And as much as I love Dubai, and they've changed and all of that, I mean, they were always, more liberal.
Yes.
But I think it's a combination of a lot of factors. What I had here was a support infrastructure, right? Like, I didn't have to create servers because Amazon Web Services existed. I had the support of the government. I had the support of other entrepreneurs. I had, if I wanted to start a business, it took you like 10 minutes to fill out some forms and get an LLC going. those weren't all true and are not true in a lot of countries today. So I think just having the rails to help you fulfill your dream and having that support structure is more present here than anywhere else.
Yeah, no, agreed. And you hit something right on the head when you spoke about knowledge, right? And that's something that we really, when we created our nutrition programs, the key component to sustainability was we sat down and we said, okay, what's the number one way you're going to get people to not just lose the weight, but actually learn to keep it off? You have to teach them. There has to be knowledge. You have to put them through something where they actually can learn things there is about themselves. So one of the first things that we're very big on is knowledge as well, in really understanding that once someone learns what it is that they need to know, the Pandora's box sort of say opens, right? And any person that actually has the commitment and the care for themselves, when they see that there is a tool that they've learned that they can actually use over time, the tendencies of going back to poor behavior is much less than it would have been if you would have just handed them something, right? That they can just follow. So, we also share that very much in common, Mohammed. Now, when you talk about knowledge, I want you to, if you can, give us a little bit more for, some of our listeners that, want to know a little more about the basics of SweatWorks, like exactly, dive a little bit more into that, because I love what you're doing there. And I think everyone needs to really learn on a little more of a detailed scale how you do that.
Sure. So let me first start with our structure, and I'm going to work backwards into how we kind of got there. So if a brand were to engage us, right, what we provide is really strategy, product development. So we could do everything from figuring out what does your product look like from an in-studio experience or even online on an app or a website. We provide the UX UI, so we can do design, both hardware and software. So if you're looking to build a connected fitness product, as an example, we could do everything from the console development to the app development and all of that. And then we also provide post-launch support, right? So after you launch this product, how are you going to build your own internal team and ultimately be able to take this over yourself? So we get engaged by a lot of established brands, right, like an Equinox, that might not have a digital team in-house and said, we want to go here, but we don't have the time, so we're going to come hire you, and you could build that arm for us. We could get engaged by companies like Beachbody, who will engage us to be their innovation arm and their R&D arm. We're going to give you, go hire a team of 10 people, put them through your cycle, and constantly come up with new ideas for us. How can we engage your customers better? What's the new product concept? What works? What doesn't work? And how we got there and how we continue to grow is by culture and investing in people. So we know that the value in everything that we do comes down to our talent. So we always try to hire the best and brightest in the industry, but once we get them, it's all about education, training, constant communication, and making sure that we're at the forefront of the wellness industry today. And it's a little bit easier for us because at any given time, we're probably involved in 20 to 30 different projects. That is the leading or bleeding edge in the category. So we do a lot of knowledge sharing internally. So we could say, hey, you're working on this real-time, sweat monitoring patch. What is that about? How did you build it? How do we figure it out? And maybe that's applicable somewhere else. So that's kind of what we do. So we typically I would say we are a consulting and an agency. So brands hire us to either build our product or innovate and ideate for them.
Yeah, so that's what it sounded like, more of a consulting. And that's fantastic. That's something that, is very much needed. And we're hoping to talk to you about this off the air for us as well, because this is something that even our brand, and and I'll relay this, we built an excellent brand locally in North Shore, Long Island, that does really cool, innovative things. And we have an excellent infrastructure. And one of the areas that we're looking into, and one of the reasons why I looked into you again and we were looking to connect, was because this is exactly what someone like us is looking for, who is placed where we can go national and have different formations of products that can benefit people. And lot of people, as established as they may be in their business like we are, it's a very hard road to figure out if you don't have any kind of platform to go by. So I think what you're doing is excellent.
So one thing what we find often, even in the biggest brands like a Planet Fitness, right? A big box gym that has everything figured out. They really don't. They really lean a lot on agencies like us. So what you end up being is really good at what you are. So you're a great operator, you know your product, you know your skill, and you know how to communicate and connect with your customers and get them through a successful journey. But other areas, even let's say you weren't going to go digital, how do you collect data from that customer? How do you articulate that data? How do you contextualize it? That's not your wheelhouse, right? You don't know how to do that. And then to your point, if you want to become a national brand and then start charging a subscription or taking online consults, how can you get connected with them, right? Is it connecting with their Apple Watch or their Oura Ring, or how do you get biometric readings from them? How can they experience Zen 57 in LA when you're in the North Shore of Long Island? But I think it can even be closer to home though, right? Like I spend my summers out east in East Hampton, and maybe, I'm not going to drive out an hour and a half every, week to see you in all that traffic. So how can you reach out to your consumers that maybe spend time or busy entrepreneurs who are traveling all the time as well?
Yeah, no, it's well said and a great point, and that's exactly that next step for us that, we're going to talk about. But getting to what you just mentioned, right? The different tools in terms of measuring things within the fitness industry, right? You mentioned a couple of things like the Oura. Matt and I happen to use the Whoop. It's when you're looking at all of these different technologies that are now out, right? How do you differentiate for your clientele as to what these things are, which one is better for them, and why they should use one as opposed to other? Or do you have a favorite one that you think kind of categorizes everything and that's kind of the platform to go with?
Yeah, I love that question, Sam. So I have two comments to make there. One, we're really evolving from what I call a two-dimensional world. And to me, the two-dimensional world is where you come into an experience and you go through that experience. Dimension one is you walk in and everything that you present, from your waiting room area into your studio. And the next dimension is the connection that you have, the community that you have, right? So that's the current world that we live in today. The three-dimensional world is what happens outside of your studio. And let's say you had someone, typical gyms or studios look to get you in there for at least 3 times for 45 minutes at a time. If you extrapolate that, right, that means that the gym or studio is really touching you for about 2% of your week. Now, how can you expect to influence behavior or positive behavioral change if you're touching them for only 2% of the week? And that's all even if you have a trainer 3 times a week, that's 2% of your entire time.
That's right.
So we add what's called the third dimension, which is how can we find out what that person is doing outside of when they're just with us face to face, because that's what we need to know in order to provide value. And that's where the wearables come in. Wearables aren't the only way to do that. There's other ways to do that. You can have a food log, you can be texting people, and there's some great technologies around there. But since you asked me about wearables, I want to touch on that. Something that we found, and this is really a post-pandemic evolution, is we've learned that consumers want you to meet them where they are.
Yep.
You and Matt are wearing a Whoop, right? It would behoove me to come to you and say, I need you to wear an Apple Watch, or I need you to wear an Oura Ring or some other device. You have a Whoop. So the expectation is you're going to work with what I have because I've already invested in this product. I know the interface. I'm going to work with that. So we already take that as table stakes. You've got to work with what the consumer has. The next step is most of these platforms, and I'm thinking about Apple, Samsung, Whoop, Fitbit, Polar, Garmin, right? Aura, they've all opened up their interfaces. So in fact, Whoop has announced a whole host of integrations, some of which we've worked on, into other brands. And here's what we do that's special. If you open up the Whoop app today, a lot of these brands, and you take the biggest smartwatch in the world today in Apple, and I have an Apple Watch on, they have to build a product that is for everybody. So their interface is meant to be to provide you very high level generalized data, but that's really what they're providing you is data. But how does that data apply to the brand that you have in Zen 57? right? How do you contextualize that for the member? So when a member comes to you, they're coming to you because, I mean, I'm sure most of you members are wearing a wearable already. If the wearable had all the answers to what they needed, they wouldn't need to come to you, or they wouldn't need to go see a trainer. They wouldn't need to, right, to have this other experience, but it doesn't. So what we do is we just take the data from the wearable and we will add the brand's own ethos into it. So that could mean, Whoop says I'm not recovered. Well, what is the Zen 57 answer to that? How can I improve my recovery?
That's been my question. You hit it on the head, right?
Right? That's what we do.
Yeah,
Well,
because
I
want to jump in on this because that's such a vital point you just hit on. And I have this discussion with other fitness professionals constantly. You know, at the age of 42 in my Zen 57 training, I'm not interested in taking my body to a 12.4 strain on a daily basis that Whoop says is my limit, right? Now, also, my 6.2 can be somebody else's 15.4, right? So how does that metric allow you to understand? Like, this is, if you are figuring that out, because that was my question when using this Whoop for a year. I'm like, okay, if you're comparing the notes, this person has a higher score of strain constantly than I do, but that gives them no indication that they're in better shape, better health, or even utilizing the Whoop to the best of their ability for what they want to do.
So something that I've never been a fan of are numbers that sound like they have a lot of punch, but don't really have a lot of relevance to wellness. And I'm talking about numbers like BMI, your weight, the nutrition label on the back of packages with 2,000 calories format.
Right.
People look at that and they get guidance from it, and none of those things matter to overall health and wellness.
That's right.
We'll get into this later, but I'm more interested in really the health of your mind and your stress and your cortisol levels and those types of things, which are better indicators of mortality and long-term well-being. But back to your point around Whoop and how do you contextualize that data, you stated something that is relevant, that your strain of a 6 is very different than someone else's strain of 6. That's why you've got to look at more than just what Whoop tells you in order to understand them better. So to get to that strain, what kind of activities did you do the day before or a couple of days prior? And really learn that. So that's what we do. We will then download that data, right, and really provide context to say, in order for Sam to get to this strain level, and sometimes we don't even track the strain data. We don't always do that. But over time, so we'll track all the activities, and we'll build our own model. We're really using the wearable as more of a capture device, right, and relying less on the metrics that they actually give you and more on what they're telling you in terms of what they're capturing from your daily activity. However, over time, what's going to happen when you do that is a user, you're going to know what your 6 is like, and you're going to know what activities you can do to either raise that high if you want to go for a higher level of strain or lower it, right? So you could then communicate, but that takes education and time. So before we get to that, we first start on learning more about that person. And really, again, we use the Whoop like you would use your Apple AirPods as really as a device to capture data from you.
That's so well said. You know, you hit something right on the head. The reason why, you know, not the reason, but the formation of the Zen 57 system was for that mental stress, right? I mean, I created the entire infrastructure, and it's the only training system that actually focuses on an anatomical sequence on a daily basis that hits your nervous system, utilizes the nervous system as a language between your mind and your body. And it's done by utilizing methods from Kundalini, Ashtanga yoga, Zurkhona training from the Middle East, Qigong, Tai Chi, Kung Fu, and all of these different movements mixed with anatomy cause a certain amount of serotonin, a certain amount of decreasing of inflammation inside that vagus nerve to be able to stabilize the spine correctly. This technical data is something we're looking to measure, right? So because for me, I understand that when you gain control of your breath through different formations, if you have gotten your body physically to a point where you're holding a 5-minute plank and at the 3rd minute, you're doing 1 minute of breath of fire, right? In the duration of that, which is in and out breath through the nose, that is a completely different tune to your nervous system. And to be able to measure those type of tools, we've been looking at some of the products that you put on your head that measures the brain waves. We've been looking at the Whoop. We've been looking at all of these different components to show what kind of an improvement you actually get on your nervous system. I'm collecting the data from the clients based on how many days they're hitting. Someone starts a streak, they do 7 days in a row. 20 something happens, 21 days in a row. I notice something happens, 40 days in a row, something happens. Today I had 425 straight days in a row, by the way. So, there is a level of frequency and an operation that my nervous system and my body is working at that you can't replicate any other way other than actually putting in the work on a daily basis. And to measure that, whatever that measure of Zen is that keeps you cool by utilizing your body into that motion every single day, day in and day out. I think that's such a key component. I mean, that's something where, we really would love to get involved with SweatWorks.
Yeah, so I think, look, I mean, you said a lot to unpack there, but I will state at a very macro level, we could measure breath through heart rate. Right, so you could know how many breaths you're taking through heart rate, and there's algorithms. I mean, Whoop does that today, but there's algorithms out there that already do that. What I'd also add to your point around the central nervous system and how do you train that, I think the broader consumer is getting more educated because of brands like Whoop and Aura already by being introduced to HRV. And by being introduced to HRV, which is a term that a decade ago, Sam, I mean, how many people really knew what HRV even was or even existed? And frankly, how many devices had the ability to capture it? Because unless you had a strap on or very particular equipment, optical sensors were not good about capturing HRV like they are today. And today, they just smooth it out. They're still not great, but they're pretty darn close. So I think that's one. And people understand like your autonomous nervous system and what your HRV tells you about the state of your ANS, right? And why that matters. And then when you go deeper in, that's more to the point of what you are talking about. I mean, how do we capture ultimately, what you're saying? I think I don't know if we're there yet right now.
Yeah.
I think we can still start collecting data, and we use technology called machine learning. I don't know if you've heard that term or not. Machine learning is the precursor to true AI.
Yeah.
So machine learning is where we collect all the data points, like all the things that you mentioned, and we put that into an engine that then looks for patterns and trends. Once we find the patterns and trends, we can then formulate algorithms. We can segment users and formulate algorithms and say, based off of all these conditions, here's what we can expect. Here's what this is trending towards. That takes about 6 months or a year of collecting data from lots of people. Then we could build out an AI model. And once we have that AI model, we could then start really driving true recommendations. And we know that if you continue down this path, this is what's going to happen. However, we also recognize that people have to live their lives. And, Whoop might say that you can go crush a workout today because your strain is so low, but you've got a jam-packed day already. You've got something to do with your kids. And I think, the technology is great, and it's designed to help you lead better lives. But what we found is the technology can also be stress-inducing and anxiety-driven, where you're always looking at,
that's right.
How did I sleep? What did I do? And I think you've got to take a step back. So when we try to implement tech, it's also on how to implement tech. We're here to make people feel better, not bring on another layer of anxiety in an anxiety-driven world already. So we're looking for really low nudges and small behavioral changes, because the downside of products like Whoop, and there's a lot of good that they do, is that it forces you to act more reactionary.
Yes.
Right? Without really saying, if you make these incremental lifestyle changes over time, here's what you could look like 6 months or a year from now. And when you do that, repetitive, smaller changes, you have changes that are going to stick, and you're going to evolve as a person, and you're going to be a better person because of it. Our wearables today don't do that. An Apple Watch today, I mean, people talking about short term, where people are focused on closing their rings. Yeah. That shouldn't even be a thing. Yeah. Right? Like maybe it's fine that they're gamifying it, but is that, if you close your rings every day, does that mean you're going to be a healthier person? No, it means that you're achieving a goal. It doesn't mean that you're on a path towards lifelong wellness. probably better than doing nothing.
Yes.
Right? But so I feel like this is the first step, is you now have all these wearables, they're quantifying data for you, they're giving you things that you can action on more quickly, closing all your rings per day on an Apple Watch. We're really looking at about a 7-day period to figure out your strain.
Yeah.
But now the next evolution of that is, how do we use all of that data and forget the rings, but use the data from the Apple Watch to drive longer term behavioral changes. I don't know the exact numbers, Sam, you probably know this, but you've got to do something like 300 times for it to be permanent.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
How do we insight that? And then how do we show people that, yes, because that is a longer term thing. And I think consumers are getting better at that, because again, pre-pandemic, it was really hard for them to understand what small changes could mean to longer term health benefits, like even drinking more water. Like I always walk around with water, and that's intentional. How did I get to know how much water I need to drink? By tracking it. And after a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I don't need to track it. I just know what I need to drink. And that becomes innate in you.
So, yeah, so you said 300, times for it to become permanent. And it's one of my mottos that I tell people is there's no substitution for the work, right? And you have to put in the work in order to get the return. The data is fantastic. I agree with you, but you're right. The goal is in the interpretation, right? What does it mean and how does it pertain to you, right? How does it pertain to you as a company? How does it pertain to your customers, your clientele, to help them achieve their goals better? I love that. Another question I have for you is this whole new wave of Oculus, right? Virtual reality and stepping into a world where it's very new, okay? And you're now talking about adding a very cool element, but also taking away a very natural element at the same time, right? Where you are changing cognitive behavior without even moving yet, just from a thing that you put on your head and the switch of it, right? So when you talk about the nervous system, right away, your space and time shifts because visually you're transported into a different state, right? In terms of that type of training, is that like a whole new field that you guys are going to be looking into, capturing and understanding how to perform that, how to capture that data and how it might differ from, let's say, if I was actually out on top of a hill somewhere instead of when I was just visualizing it because it's in the Oculus?
Yeah, look, I think, again, what we're focused on heavily is on access and meeting the consumer where they are. And to us, the Oculus, in fact, that fitness team is based right here in DC, and we are working with them. So the quick answer is no, we don't know the differences that it's going to have in cognitive behavior longer term, because right now we're just building really simple applications. But longer term, I'm excited about the access that it provides, where people might not be able to come into your studio, right, because you're in the North Shore of Long Island,
right, and
maybe they're in Seattle. But now with Oculus, they can experience it and be part of your class and see the people around you. And that's meaningful because, again, it lowers the price of entry and provides access to more people. But you brought up a really interesting point that we've actually never thought about, is from a cognitive perspective, what is the impact that it has when you're used to physically, going somewhere and immersing yourself in an experience? It's something I would say that we've seen more recently through the pandemic is working out from home. And what we do know is that most people, I'm making a general statement here because I've actually hit PRs at home during the pandemic, but most people actually work out harder and put in more effort when they're in a group setting and in person. Even if they're at a gym training by themselves, they push themselves harder than when they are at home for the same exact exercise, the same type of class. So that much we know. But if you can't make it to the gym and you only have 30 minutes, doing something at home is better than not going to the gym at all, right? So there's pros and cons, and I have a feeling that what we're going to find with the metaverse and with what Oculus is trying to do is similar, that it gives you access. It's still really hard to replicate the real thing.
Understood. That's very, very well put, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's so interesting, for me, what really excites me about technology is, we're starting to have the proper technological tools to measure what spirituality has been talking about for years. And I think that's a huge gap that is slowly starting to translate itself with the different scientific tools that are being created. As I was telling you earlier, we're very much involved in medical worlds with physicians as well. And I see this a lot. There's I've said this before in the podcast, there's a gentleman here who is the CEO of the Feinstein Institute, and they're the leading research right now around the world on the vagus nerve and creating different tools that measure specific responses with sound waves within the vagus nerve, right? And to see that they can shift mental states with sound waves by implementing things along the lines of that vagus nerve, hardware and software combined, right? And when you see that, being so committed to the spiritual world myself, but also being a scientist at heart, trying to kind of bridge that gap in between, by creating the language so people can understand how to get into that world. It's so refreshing to hear you, someone who's in the leading portion of the industry within the technology world of fitness, understand this and be able to break it down the way you do. So just kudos to you. I really want to, that's for a lot of our listeners and probably your listeners that are in the fitness world, that's not something that most people just get.
So, yeah, no, I agree. But like I said, we're all about the data. We're all about the research and the science. But to the consumer, we understand that they just want to use it and have it work. Yeah. They don't always care about, what goes behind it. So we want to create this low friction experience, but we understand that in order to really get positive behavioral changes, there's a lot that goes into it. And I love what you said around sound. And I want to touch on that. I mean, have explored research on something called toning, right? Which is when you are, two things, listening to audio, like you mentioned, and the impact that it has on anxiety and stress, but also in how you speak and being able to detect your stress from how you speak as well. And by having you just orate a few sentences, the immediate impact that can have on your stress level is fascinating. Something else that is, interesting for your audience, I think, is the price of entry for a lot of the tools that they have needed, where you had to go in, is changing. One example that I ran into last month is a company called Paradigm out of Texas. They are a startup. They're still working on their product, but they've been able to figure out, this is going to blow your mind, Sam. If you had to look at your cortisol level before, the option that you had is obviously go get blood work done. Right. Take a piece of hair or your nail, right? Mail it out to a lab, spit into a tube, mail it out into a lab, and then you kind of find out what that is. But that you'll get the results like 3 days later. And your cortisol level changes all the time. Right. So what they figured out is how you could essentially, you create a baseline by taking saliva samples 5 times a day, using AI, this is the part that we're working on, using AI to take a picture of a special piece of paper that they have and analyzing that, so it creates a baseline, and then you just do a check once a day. And in real time, your cortisol level in real time. And they have figured that out to 98% accuracy of a lab result. Wow. So again, it's not as good as a lab, but for the everyday use, that's the kind of low friction, low cost tools that we need.
That's a game changer. That's fantastic.
It's a game changer.
Yeah,
right? So that's just
absolutely.
one example. How do we incorporate that? So, okay, you wake up, you brush your teeth, you spit in a tube. You know what your stress level is at. Yeah. So maybe you need to incorporate, forget the workout, skip the high intensity Peloton ride, do 30 minutes of Zen 57 today. Right, that's right. Because that's what you need. And then tomorrow you can crush it. That's right. So that's the kind of stuff right now the consumers are more used to, like, I'm just going to get on a Peloton. I'm just going to go to the gym and do the same thing over and over again. Yeah. But life is dynamic. The air we breathe, the environment that we're in, the foods that we eat, the drinks that we have, our circumstances, what's on our mind is not fixed. It's dynamic. But why do we treat training as a structured program when life is not structured?
Well, I want to hit on something right there, and then I want to ask you one final question. Is, one thing I want to hit on is really such an important point. In the Zen 57, I tell people this is not a supplemental training system to what you're already doing. This is like, you go to sleep, you understand sleep is valuable. You brush your teeth, you understand brushing your teeth is valuable. When you wake up and you understand how to sequentially stimulate your nervous system through proper anatomical movement, you stimulate your most important functioning tool on a daily basis. So if you're a runner, if you lift, I mean, we work with some professional athletes, right? And when they get into that state of mind 30 minutes first thing in the morning, their performance is on a whole nother level because those stress levels are lower. So it's not something that's replacing their Peloton or anything else that they're doing, but it's just another added tool. And that's for that exact reason that you just mentioned, is because it is something that constantly changes every day. And that's why we train 7 days a week, right? There's a class every day, and it hits a different form every day, right? So that is the process behind that. You mentioned something at the end, and you said about the impact of nutrition. I want to ask you about where is your world in data collection for nutrition, right? Because other than just typing something in and logging it in, that's where everything is right now, right? Because a huge portion of what we do is nutrition. But how do you transfer the proper data and correlate it to your training regimen and life?
Yeah, look, if I always say this, nutrition is king and exercise is queen, right? So you got to focus on nutrition first, but it is one of the hardest things to quantify and track. You can use apps like MyFitnessPal, but no one really wants to log in stuff. So you asked me where our industry is. I think you're going to see a lot of advancement and evolution happen this year. In fact, we're working with companies like there's one brand in Boston called Inside Tracker. Working with them to use AI to, all you do is just scan it. If you take a picture of food and forget it. Whatever you eat, if it's a glass of water, take a picture of that, scan it, and you're done. It's got to be that simple. And through that, we'll do the analysis to figure out what you're eating. And we're using a combination of geo-based data. So we know that if you are at this location, you're in Manhasset, right? There's a great French place there that I always eat at, and you had a piece of steak. So we know what's on the menu, we know where you're at, and we know what you ate. If you're at home, same thing. We know that you're at home, do what you like to cook, and I think it's got to be frictionless. We are not there yet. So right now, where we are at is we're getting really good at recommendations. So we know that based off of your cortisol level, based off of your blood work, based off of how you're working out, whatever input you're giving us, we can draw recommendations to say, you need more turmeric in your diet. Here's a place to get it. You need more vitamin D in your diet. Here's a place to get it. Eat more of this and less of that. We're really good at that. But the next evolution is actually looking at what you're eating in the real world, and then driving and tracking that, and then driving behaviors based off of that.
Yeah, no, one of the things that I would recommend, I don't know if you guys looked into it already yet, but with our Helix and Gene and our nutrition programs, one of the baselines tests that we do is we have our own form of inflammation test. So it's like a little finger prick test, and it looks at over 130 food groups that tells you where your body's inflammation responses are. So, I think that's a very, very, very good, it's not quite inexpensive, but it's also not too expensive, whereas the average person cannot do it, and it's incredible vital information. And I think as a baseline also to understand how, maybe you would think a steak would be good for you, but if it's causing, inflammation inside your body at a high level, you may not know that. One of the things that we find out, Mohammed, is we'll have somebody, for instance, have high inflammation to things like spinach, cucumber, and we've noticed that if you track this, what happens is if you are cutting up spinach and you're putting it in your salad on a daily basis over a 7-year period, and it's causing inflammation inside your system, that can turn out over a period of time to give you about 7 to 10 pounds of inflammatory fat on top of your organs. And that's a healthy food, right? That's not sugar. That's not McDonald's, right? So when we tell people this and they start understanding and giving them the tools on how to make those shifts, it's so eye-opening. So as a baseline, I would definitely tell you to look at the food intolerance tests if you guys have not done that yet as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, I think those are great tools, and that's the kind of stuff that's available now that we're able to do.
Right, yeah. So I want to close this off with you today, as long, obviously you and I can sit here and talk all day, and we definitely have to do a 2.0 version of this. But I always like to ask each guest a question that requires a little bit of thought. In terms of where you see the medical and fitness world coming together with technology, where do you see that going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so look, I think there's the intersection of wellness and fitness is happening as we speak, and I think it's going to happen over the next 10 years. And there are two drivers towards that. The first is regulations is changing. Regulations are changing and have changed through the pandemic. For instance, you could now do a telehealth visit very easy with your doctor, and most doctors are comfortable doing that. Pre-pandemic, you probably couldn't. You can now text and communicate better. Doctors are able to collect information and share information better. So there's regulation-driven changes that are happening, which are much needed to have that disruption happen. The other side is you've got big tech really looking to improve healthcare. Amazon Care just launched a program and took it national about a month ago.
Yep.
Apple Fitness is building up their health ecosystem and their health platform. The disruption is absolutely happening. I think the challenge is you have, on one hand, a system that's really focused on reactionary. Again, we just talked about this idea of preventative versus reactionary. Our healthcare system today is the best in the world. It's the best in the world at fixing something that is broken in you. Right? Yeah. If you are broken and you are unwell, there's no better place in the world to be in. We are very fortunate to be here.
Yes.
But it's also very inaccessible. 40% of Americans are either uninsured or underinsured. So we know that access is a problem. We know it's very expensive. It's the second or first reason for bankruptcy, depending on what you're looking at. Divorce is the other one. And that has to change. Then on the other hand, on the side that we're on, we're focused on wellness. We're focused on the preventative, right? So you don't get to the doctor. Go get your checkups. But we want to get in a state where we're dealing pandemics that we're in today. I'm talking about obesity. I'm talking about heart disease, right? Everyone talks about COVID as a pandemic, but there are other pandemics that have been here for decades, right? That people have not paid attention to. So we're focused on changing that. But the healthcare system has a significant role to play, and I think this intersection is going to happen where they could now see how their consumers are doing from afar, and they can recognize things and insights that the wellness community might not, and say, hey, you have an early indicator of this, or you're trending more towards this. And I think that's where the intersection is going to happen, where the preventative and the reactionary sides are going to come together to really form like one cohesive ecosystem.
I love that, and I'm happy to see a mind like yours be in the forefront of making that, accessible and for the average person and the public. I think that's phenomenal. Mohammed, if our listeners want to know more about you and your company, where is the best spot to go? Obviously, if you guys look up Mohammed or SweatWorks, you're going to see everything. But is there a generally a good place for them to learn more knowledge about what you're talking about for them to just drop in on?
Yeah, I think if you just want to know about what we do, go to sweatworks.com. We're constantly updating and improving our site. If you want to learn more about me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Yes.
It's kind of the old social network that I'm really in.
Same,
so
yeah.
Feel free to follow me, connect with me.
Yeah.
Try to post frequently and keep everyone abreast on what we're working on.
You do, and I love your posts, and you and I share the same love for fitness, wellness, Zen, family, and everything else. I want to thank you so much for coming on board today, Mohammed. It was truly a pleasure having you, and I'm looking forward to talking with you both professionally and personally off the air again about a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, Sam, let's do it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Pleasure. Thanks, Mohammed.
Well, there you have it. That was Sam Baluch and Mohammed Iqbal, the CEO and founder of SweatWorks, Helix podcast, episode 26. I found that episode to be fascinating, as I told you in the beginning. This episode, this origin story that Mohammed told was one of the most compelling, most well spoken I've ever heard. As I said, I expected to get on the call and talk to Mohammed about data and Whoop and heart rate variability and biometrics. And we did do that, but not for the first 15, 20 minutes. What we spoke about in the beginning was, Mohammed's connection with food with his hands, and then the disconnection from there, and knowledge and transformation and purpose and running the mile in the President's Club, and, things that really help people change their life. So I will put extensive show notes below, and feel free to click on them and listen again. And I think if you listen closely to what Mohammed is saying, and pair that with some devices that work well for you, you really have something to help you move forward on your health journey. So thank you for listening again. This was Helix and Gene podcast, episode 26. Be sure to visit us at helixandgene.com. And that's it. We'll talk soon. Take care.